What's up, everybody? It's me. I'm back from dog sitting and stuff. And couple things happened. So I now have a. I've had a YouTube channel. It's just been I just don't post anything on it. But now, luckily, I've gotten to a point where I have now uploaded everything that we've done here on the channel, on the Twitch channel. I've put all that on YouTube. So if anyone wants to check that out, all the VODs are, it should be somewhere on my account. If not, it's just Kanato. You probably look up like Kanato therapy student. But I also changed my name on here because that was different than my YouTube channel. And I also haven't played Smash in a long time, so I feel like Naughty Smash is kind of like I haven't heard that name in a long time. So like it's I'm excited to like have the VODs in one place now, so I don't have to keep worrying about like the highlight, because I keep seeing that like the highlight storage space is like decreasing and decreasing, so like it's a problem. Good news is we once again, for like literally every stream since like I think like the first two, which I did both in the same day, I think. We've had like a question every single time, so I'm super happy about that. So this one comes from Jordan, and it's actually in reference to a past thing. Overall how I had to shorten how it was phrased because it would not have fit on here, but I basically got to the gist of what he was asking. And so the question is it possible for someone to have a hyperactive amygdala? If so, is it possible to train your amygdala to be less active? So for those of you unacquainted, like what this essentially means is is it possible to like, because the amygdala is responsible for like a couple different parts of our brain, but the main thing is that it's responsible for being like the fear center of the brain. And it's like it governs like fear, anxiety, and negative emotions. And also, importantly, to add to that, it also in an important caveat to that is that also it also is responsible for learning. Like it's attached to like the learning center. And so um the reason that our brain does that is because the amygdala is like think about it this way. Think about the importance of remembering things that are extremely emotional. It like have a lot of emotional energy attached to them. So like we learn a lot through negative emotions. Negative emotion is actually the greatest reinforcer of learning. And so like, if we learn that like, oh, if I do this, then bad thing happens to me, then it makes sense that our brain would primarily want to learn to do that and to not do that. So, so essentially, like super boiled down, because obviously, like every part of the brain has like billions, trillions of neurons and whatever. Like, but what we need to understand is that like the amygdala is essentially like if you have like anxiety, depression, or PTSD, odds are it's like some sort of deficiency of the amygdala. And so basically, it's like, is it possible for someone to have a hyperactive amygdala? Yes, because that is so we can answer that question right away, because like the main part of what we're going to be talking about today is the second part, because the answer is yes to that, but we're also just going to be talking in depth about how you can actually do that, because like it's one thing to just know you have depression, but like it's another thing entirely to like be given like something actually active that you can do to improve your depression. And so how do I write this out? Hyperactive amygdala results in PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Oh, why did I write bullet points so that I did that? Okay. Depression. Sorry about that. Okay. So that's what it results in generally. And so like if so, is it possible for the to have the amygdala not be hyperactive, or like train it to be less hyperactive? I can't give you a concrete I can't give you a concrete thing about I I can't give you a concrete uh like this will for sure help you with that, but I can give you tips that will hopefully be helpful, and just like scientifically what tends to lead to less hyperactive stimulation of like the fear center of your brain. Because what the amygdala does is it produces cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So I'm just going to write like stress, because like that's kind of like a generalization of it, but I think it's useful sometimes to overgeneralize things, because like it helps us actually provide like a concrete model, rather than having to just like every 5 seconds be like, well, actually there's nuances to it. Actually, like as long as we just agree from the outset that like to take what I say with a grain of salt about the amygdala, because I'm going to overgeneralize it, I think we're going to have like a way more productive conversation about it. And so um and so basically, like we have to understand like the root cause of this, and we've talked a lot about this in our past streams. So like cause of hyperactivation. So there's many reasons that this could be hyperactivated. It could be biological. Like you could just be biologically predispositioned to like have a more hyperactive amygdala. These things will still apply to you if that is the case, so don't worry. But also it can be environmental. So like what I mean by this is that like if it's environmental that you have like an extremely hyperactive amygdala, it means that like you basically like probably grew up in an environment where like having a lot of anxiety or stress was like adaptive or helpful in some sort of way. So like I like to use the example of like if you have an abusive parent come home, it's very helpful to like get the fear signal very strongly with at like many times, because it makes your brain be hyper vigilant, and therefore you're not going to and therefore you're going to like sense the danger and be able to avoid it more effectively, and that will reinforce in the brain that like, okay, it's good that we were anxious because of that. And so it will basically learn to be anxious like all the time. um and so like the thing about environmental is that like it has two things, and once again this is going to be very familiar to people who have already seen the stream. There's adaptive and maladaptive. So like adaptive is like when it's still like this amount of anxiety is justified and it helps me more than it hurts me in a general survival sense. But like it can also be maladaptive, which is why most people would want their anxiety to go down. Because like if you're still in it like an abusive home, like it's generally like adaptive to have anxiety, because like it protects you most likely. I can't make a blanket statement because obviously every household's different and all that sort of stuff. So like don't take that like as advice or anything. Um, like I said, nothing we discuss here should be taken like as advice. It's just I'm offering my 2 cents. So just like take it like any other piece of information you read on the internet. Like just like be very skeptical about it. Do your own research, all that sort of stuff. I'm just providing like hopefully like a targeted amount of research you can have. Or if any of this stuff resonates with you, like just take it with a grain of salt. But like maladaptive is like when you're out of that household and now the amount of anxiety you feel in everyday life is disproportionate to the amount of stimuli you get. So like if you get so like now if I have anxiety but like I'm on a date or something, then it's not nearly like it that definitely hurts me more than it helps me. Like it doesn't help me to be like over analyzing and sensing danger when there isn't danger, like when I'm on a date, because like that's like it's gonna be off-putting to the person. um and so the thing is that like sometimes people will be like, why am I so stressed all the time? But like they'll have a life that kind of demands a lot of stress and attention from them. So in that sort of case, it sometimes makes sense for you to feel like that. And like I can't place a judgment value on how much better or worse your life would be if you were to remove stress. Because we typically think of stress as like a negative thing. So it's like, oh, well, if you get rid of it, it's obviously better. But like, we have to remember like emotions aren't like bad or good. They're just pleasant or unpleasant. Like negative emotions serve a purpose. Like if we didn't feel fear, we probably would have died out as a species because we wouldn't be able to like, we wouldn't have incentive to avoid danger. Um, and so I think it's good to have like a healthy amount of fear, a healthy amount of anxiety, all that sort of stuff, as long as like you don't let it control your actions, which is when it becomes like maladaptive. And so we've got like so like either it's like biological or like it's learned, nature versus nurture. But regardless, we have to just understand that like the brain is sending a lot of fear signals, so you can make a determination on whether or not you want to be less stressed or not, or whether or not you think it actually helps you focus on very real problems in your life. But I definitely wouldn't just assume that because it's stress it's bad. And so I do think there's like healthier ways to respond to stress. Like I don't think stress, you have to internalize it, but I do think it's important to like not cut off stress from your life as like a blanket statement, because sometimes I think it like if you're in a war, it's probably good that you're stressed, sort of thing. So that's kind of like what causes it. Now let's get to like ways to um like how did Jordan phrase it? Let me see. um Jordan phrased it like, is it possible to train your amygdala to be less active? So we're going to put training. So training, there's a lot of things you can do. And like, I'm not claiming that these things are easy. I'm just saying that like they're going to sound simple. And so it's going to sound like I'm making like a molehill out of a mountain or whatever. But I need you guys to understand that like if you want more details about like how to make these things more applicable, I can always like deep dive into like even things like how to make a better sleep schedule and stuff like that. And so let's just start off with like sleep. And I would argue like it's arguably the most important. So like a lot of times we have mental health issues, and a lot of times we generally don't really validate the fact that like we're like, yeah, I know sleep generally makes you in a better mood, but like how do I be happy with like a terrible sleep schedule? And like I don't know how to say this, but like you kind of like don't like sleep is so unbelievably crucial for learning, for your mood, for everything. But like all we need to focus on right now is like the mood, because like when you don't have a lot of sleep, your brain isn't very good at making judgments, and therefore it's going to because the fear center helps us focus. In general, the brain may find it adaptive to send stress signals because it's the only thing that will get you to focus on, like, let's say, like the road or something like that. So I think that a lot of people will be like, my depression's really bad, I don't know how to make it better, and then all this sort of stuff. And then I will tell them, like, are you getting enough sleep? And that sounds really invalidating to a lot of people, because they're like obviously if you're dealing with like incredibly complex thoughts, it feels very invalidating for me to then boil it down to, oh, are you eepy? Oh, is baby tired? Like that sounds really like rude. And I understand that, and I think that's like a justified response. But I think we need to remember that like sleep is, I weirdly think, under exaggerated when it comes to this stuff. And it's because it sounds offensively simple as a solution. But like I can't speak from like a clinical perspective, but I just know that because I've struggled with like extreme anxiety. Like I was diagnosed with, I've been formally diagnosed before with with an extreme amount of anxiety. That's like the wording that my therapist used. She said like I have extreme levels of anxiety. So I have personal experience with this stuff. I'm not saying that there isn't deep rooted trauma within that, because there absolutely was, but like my ability to not only make progress when it comes to uncovering that trauma, but also just in general, my mood and my regulation of my mood is it's so important for you to get sleep. I literally cannot over exaggerate this. So like, if any of y'all have like lives where like it's kind of almost seemingly impossible for you to get enough sleep, then like I would encourage like you guys to like reach out to me or something, because like I give people sleep schedules. And like I said, I don't like to give advice and stuff, but I can just give suggestions and say like, maybe try this out if it sounds good to you. That's just where my mind's at. And typically when people, regardless of how big their problems seem in their mind, it's amazing how much they shrink, because they're still problems, but it's amazing how much easy they are to tackle when you're not constantly focusing on regulating your mood all day, which your ability to do will be incredibly impaired if you don't have a lot of sleep. So sleep is like incredibly important. I know that sounds very water is wet, but I weirdly think even though there's a lot of people out there saying like, oh, that's so obvious, like I would if I could, like all that sort of stuff. I still feel the need to emphasize it, because I feel like they do that to less so acknowledge my argument and more so try and like invalidate it by being like, oh, if only it were that simple, or I'm getting as much sleep as I can. But like I said, most people stay up all the time doom scrolling, which by the way is not good for your amygdala either. You're getting way more angry than you actually should. And so anyways, let's just move on. So you can also do meditation. And once again, I know a lot of people are very like, because I used to be like this, like very like anti-meditation, or very, here's one I hear all the time is that like, I already tried meditation and it's not for me, or, oh, I just can't get my brain to focus. And I've said this before, but like that is very much due to like the westernization of like meditation and Eastern concepts, because like meditation, if you went to like a guru and told them like, hey, just so you know, like I already tried meditation, they'd be like, what do you mean you already tried meditation? That's like saying you've already like, it's like, hey, I'm going to teach you a unique workout. Like I'm going to teach you like a specific exercise, you know, like a bench press or a dumbbell press or something like that. Pathetic examples on my part, but like but essentially like, say you're basically went to them and said, I tried all exercises, when the odds are that like you bench pressed a couple pounds and then you said like, my chest didn't get bigger. And in that same way, it's like, I couldn't get my mind to focus because like I downloaded the Calm app. No offense to the Calm app or anything, it's just that a lot of people who don't like meditation, I've noticed, have a lot of overlap with like, oh well, I downloaded an app and I tried it for a couple days and it didn't really work for me, because like they didn't have a formal teacher. And I'm not saying you should like, it's easy to get a formal teacher or whatever. I'm just saying that like I would try and deep dive into like meditations and stuff and try and figure out like either get a teacher or something like that. I'm not a great meditation teacher, but I've definitely taught people how to meditate, and they seem to like really like the tailored ones that I've given to them. I literally even taught meditation yesterday. So like there's different ones for like, there's meditations for anxiety. There's meditations for depression. There's even ones for like things like body dysmorphia and stuff like that. Now, remember, be careful, because certain meditations can re-traumatize people. That's how like intense this sort of stuff can get. So like, that's why I recommend actually either doing your research or preferably getting a teacher for it. But like meditation is not just calming your mind and breathing. Like there's the meditation I gave yesterday literally didn't involve calming the mind, and it didn't involve a breathing exercise. So like if that's all you think meditation is, then like I would encourage you to explore a little more, because there are absolutely no shortage of meditations that are specifically for like the fear center of the brain and like understanding it on a deeper level. So the second thing I would say is meditation. And then the next one I would say is just general, like oh my God, I'm going to come off as such a hippie when I say this stuff, because I'm like, oh, you got to do meditation, you got to do mindfulness. But like legitimately, when I say mindfulness, I don't mean like toxic positivity like many people think that it is. And like, I don't mean just generally seeing that you're stressed and being like, oh yeah, I know that I'm stressed, idiot. Like, I don't need to tell myself that. I'm very self-aware that I'm stressed all day. That's not what I mean. I mean, like, deep dive into the emotions and, like, understand the coloring that your brain is doing to the world. This is a very common technique in dialectical behavioral therapy, which is often for people who generally like struggle with differentiating reality from their perception of reality, because we often forget that these are two different things. But like essentially a good mindfulness technique, I think, for like overactivation of the amygdala is like you don't have to judge it and say that it's wrong, but I would generally like like think of like instead of situation, go from that to separate these two out into what is happening, like objectively happening. I don't mean like they're ghosting me. I mean like they have not responded in a while. Like really think of what's happening and then what significance your mind attaches. So like a good way to do this is that like if you're in a conversation with someone and then they kind of like go quiet for a second, or they give you a look and stuff like that, like you don't have to tell your brain like, oh, it's just a look, calm down. Like it is literally enough to just practice in your mind whenever you get anxious. Say like, okay, what objectively happened? And then what is my mind saying that means? And so it's like, if my mind says like, oh, look, they hate you, or oh, look, they're bored. I just want you to separate it in your brain and say like, okay, what they did was they were really talkative and now they're being quiet. What my mind says that is them hating me. And you don't even have to like, you don't have to invalidate that and say that it's a incorrect perception. The entire practice of this is just simply is not about acknowledging the rationality of it, but simply just like acknowledging that there is a separation between what you think is happening and what is actually happening, regardless of how much you think that they correlate. Like that's a separate argument. First, you need to separate it in your brain. So that's like the number one thing I would suggest to people with like hyperactive amygdalas or people who overanalyze everything all the time, is that like you just create some form of healthy separation between like the thing and like what you perceived the thing to be. Because like because the thing about the amygdala is that it creates, we've talked about this, like such black and white thinking. So you can often tell how stressed you are by how little nuance there is in your perceptions. So like if I try and tell you like, are there any other explanations for why this person has not answered you other than them thinking you're ugly and stupid and not wanting to be friends with you, and this is their way of telling you? And then if they're like, no, this is like, yeah, I could give you other explanations, but they'd all be wrong. Like that person is likely being affected by the amygdala, because like we said, like when you're in danger, you need to have full awareness in the present. Your mind can't be wandering to other places. So it actually makes sense that your brain would turn off the nuance center of your brain. And so that's why this is good for disarming the amygdala, because the amygdala is trying to get you to think in one dimensionality. And all this does is it doesn't place a judgment on how correct your thoughts are. All it does is give you more control over your thoughts by forcing you to separate how your brain perceives something from what's actually happening. And so in the same way that like a habit can't be a habit if you do it consciously, like the amygdala can't be overly irrational if you're able to separate out your coloring of the situation versus what's actually happening. Next we've got kind of a like a root, like you could argue that this is mindfulness, but I like to separate this out a little bit. Understanding roots. So understanding the roots, what I mean by this is like, I want you all to like when I want you to like kind of like, if you can get a therapist, that is the best way to do this. And like if people say that like they can't afford therapy, I urge you to look into free therapy. Because like there are people with sliding scales who do who like, you know, they'll charge like rich people a lot more, and then they'll charge like that will sometimes charge poor people like nothing. And so like I would strongly urge you to look into like insurance programs, or like free therapy initiatives and stuff like that, or just look into sliding scale and stuff, because I hear a lot of people don't look into therapy because of their financial situation, and I do think that there's like solutions to that potentially. I'm not saying that you're for sure going to find something, but I definitely think it's worth a try, because I think therapy is extremely good at this specific thing, which is like diving into your past. um so like what you need to do is like you need to like tell like you need to like show the amygdala that you understand why it's freaking out. So like you need to say like, you know, like okay, I see we're scared because when this happened before, it resulted in a bad thing. And so like this sounds so like when I explain this to people on like a surface level, they often like kind of reject it, which I think like is valid, because like I think you should be efficient and skeptical about things. But like I also think that like you need to understand that there's like a huge difference between being like, yeah, I'm flipping out because I'm right, and acknowledging that like you like once the amygdala knows that you understand its argument, it's going to feel a lot more validated. That sounds weird that like a part of your brain can be validated, but like that's kind of like the best example I have for like, that's kind of like the best wording I have for it, is that like it's going to understand that you get it. And then it's going to give your argument the benefit of the doubt, because it's still going to be scared, but like it will be more willing to give up control, because like think about how adaptive that is. If we don't give our brain a good reason to shut off certain parts of our mind, then like it's more adaptive for us to like, because like then we could just shut off all negative emotions at will, and people get frustrated that they can't. And like this is why we can't shut off negative emotions at will. Like imagine if like we saw like imagine if we saw like a wrecking ball flying towards us, and then like we felt fear, and then we thought like, oh, that doesn't feel pleasant in the brain, turn that off so I can be at peace. Like that's not a good reason to cut it off. So like imagine if we were able to just turn off negative emotions at will, then they wouldn't be able to control our behavior. And it's important for our survival sometimes for our brain to control our behavior in that way. And so like I think, and so like once again, this is purely for like people who have maladaptive anxiety, not adaptive anxiety. Like getting scared when a wrecking ball's coming at you is like a good thing. Like you should be scared. It should be alerting you. Your brain's doing its job. But like when you recognize that, like we set up here in the mindfulness segment, like that there's a separation between these two things, you should just like validate it and say like, and really dig into like a good question to ask yourself if you don't have a therapist is like, when is the earliest time I can remember feeling like I feel right now? And like get an emotions wheel out or something. Like dive deep into the specific emotion, because like a lot of people are alexithymic, which means that they're emotionally colorblind, which means that like they have very blanket emotions. Like they don't know that they're feeling like embarrassed or ashamed. Like they just know that they're feeling like pissed or sad, like, or something like that, just very blanket things. So like you may struggle with this if you've been a very numb person your entire life, but it's important to try and dive back and figure out like, oh, the first time I felt like that, one of the first times I felt like this helpless in a conversation is when like, you know, like I was trying to convince my parents to like not move schools, and they moved it anyways. And like I feel like I should have paid attention more, and I should have said something different. And so now I'm on this date and I want to convince them to like me. And now I feel like I'm failing at doing that task. And like if you can just understand, you know, all this like therapy stuff that like no one really like gives anything to, because it's like a lot of people assume that they truly understand their trauma and then they still like don't get better. I would argue that like true awareness of your trauma gives more power than you could ever imagine. And so like once you see like, okay, is this proportionate? Because sometimes, here's an important thing, we subconsciously don't want to give up control. Like we don't want to take away the amygdala's control, because sometimes we subconsciously agree with it. Like we'll consciously agree, like we'll be like, yeah, I have anxiety, but like I should, because I'm like stupid. Like, and that is the point where it's like, okay, use this technique. When's the last time you felt stupid? And then like you can use these two like with each other. Do you guys get this? Like you can go back in your past and say like, okay, when did I feel stupid for the first time? And then like, or like one of the first times I felt really stupid, and see what memories your brain comes up with, because those are likely very significant things in your past, and then use the mindfulness technique on it. So like you can go back and say like, yeah, I said hi to this girl, and then she like laughed at me and said like, oh, you're so stupid, and then like she walked away and stuff like that. And like understand that's like, that wasn't you being stupid necessarily, like it could be like, but like just do the separation technique and say like, okay, back then I simply did this thing and it had this response. It doesn't like mean this. It just acknowledge that there's a separation between how you're perceiving it currently, regardless of how you perceive it, and like what literally happened in like the most scientific objective way. And like that's kind of how you can start to get clarity and understand the roots of your trauma and then heal them. So in a very general way, like deep dive your past, and then sympathetically look at the reason that your brain probably did certain things, and say like, okay, I was just thinking this. And like, you can be like, oh, well, now I know that I shouldn't have done that. It's like, yeah, but past you didn't know that. So like, can you find a little bit of forgiveness in yourself? And then the answer is no. It's like, okay, why can't you feel like, there's so many paths you could take. This is why I'm like, it's hard to like say in a general sense, because like I'm not any of your therapists. And so like, but just like try and find out what the brain's logic was back then, even if it feels like you did something totally illogical. And then like understand that, and say, and like separate out like, okay, I know I feel stupid based on it, but like, let's understand that like what I did was say hi. And then like how I felt was stupid because of the response. But like just separate those things, and like honestly, like that should help like way more than it seems like it would. And then we got, one sec, I'm just trying to work my computer. There we go. Okay. And then we've also got, like sit with it. This is kind of the last thing I'll probably talk about in relation to it. So the important thing to understand is that, like, I'm not saying just live with your anxiety, like, deal with it, bro, skill issue. But, like, a lot of the time, we talked about this in a past stream, and I'm going to be saying that a lot more the more that we continue this streaming journey. Like, I've talked about how, like, a lot of people will avoid breakdowns, like they will avoid mental breakdowns, because to them that's regression and that's like the worst case scenario. But like through doing that, what they do is they push down their negative emotions, and then they like expect them to kind of just go away. And like I don't really like, and I don't know how else to say this, like there is no amount of distraction that will ever like diminish mental energy for you. Like you're like scientifically in the brain, if you push away emotions, that invalidates them and makes them stronger, because essentially what your brain learns is like, oh, I gave him 10 units of anxiety and he didn't do what I wanted. Let's try 15. Okay, it didn't work with 15. Let's try 20. And it will keep trying to get you to do what you want. And so like it will learn through invalidation that like it should be sending stronger signals. And we all know this. No one can distract themselves forever. It eventually all comes crashing down, and there's all sort of adverse effects from pushing down your emotions, like the fact that emotions will always control your decision making. It doesn't matter how logical of a person you think you are. That's just like fundamentally an incorrect like way to understand the brain, from my understanding at least. Like it's just like your brain is always making decisions based on emotions. It's just how blind you are to them or how numb you are to them. And at that point it's just like willingly putting on a blindfold, which can be adaptive, don't get me wrong. Like there can be reasons to do that are very good, but like generally it's more of a survival thing and not a happiness thing. I'm talking more about how to be happy. Like I said, sometimes stress can be good, and I think you should really think about whether or not it like is beneficial for you to be stressed in any given situation. And so like when I say sit with it, I don't mean just like deal with it and don't do anything. I mean like don't run from your negative emotions if you can do it in a safe environment. Because generally my belief is that like we create so many more problems for ourselves by demonizing the idea of mental breakdowns. And so like, cause you know, like they're the worst case scenario. They're when everything comes crashing down and you feel holistically bad and there's no upside to it. But like the thing is that your brain is generating those thoughts in the first place. And so like they're coming from you. And so they're not going to like learn to calm down until like they get what they want. And so like, I would weirdly suggest like, if you can do it in a safe environment, like where you're free from like things that can stop you from making, like you're free from things that will allow you to make very rash decisions like self-harm. I would very much, like in my personal opinion, take this with a grain of salt. This is not medical advice, this is not mental health advice. Like this is just my take that I'd like people to think about in general, is that like if you can do it in a safe environment, I would find time for negative emotions to rise to the surface without distraction. So like don't listen to music, don't scroll on your phone, don't do that stuff, and just learn to sit with the negative emotions and tolerate it, because that will not only provide an emotional catharsis. Now the emotions won't control you as much anymore. They will learn that they don't have to justify their existence to you. And so they won't keep getting stronger if you like let them come up every now and then, because like what you're telling them when you push them down is no, you're not welcome in this house. And then they break into your house. If you just open the door, they're going to be a lot less violent than they will be if they had to force their way into your house, into your like your mental home. And so like learning to tolerate negative emotions is very important, because I feel like it's hard to like prescribe, because it's a very slippery slope into like invalidating yourself and just saying like, oh, I should just sit with it, I should just like deal with it or whatever, or like, oh, I shouldn't like do anything to actually improve my mental health. I'm saying like if you can sense a large amount of negative emotion that's like compelling you to like distract yourself from it all the time, that's when I would generally suggest that like you learn to like let it come in the house every now and then, and like it's gonna suck for a while, but like that's why I kind of recommend like weirdly like slotting a time, like those memes that's like I'll have a breakdown at this time, like because like then your brain will learn to not let that leak as much into your everyday life. If you compartmentalize not compartmental, if you create a specific space in your day to have emotional catharsis, the brain will learn, okay, it's more efficient to have it during that time. But if you don't give it that time, it's going to bubble up and burst anyway. It's just that now you won't be in a safe environment and you're going to like be able to screw up your life more. And it like will happen at an inopportune time more likely. Whereas at least this way you can prepare for it and it diminishes its power over you, like both short term and long term. So generally, like to kind of review what we were talking about. So like I think of so like the amygdala generally is responsible for like stress and cortisol, which is the cortisol is like the stress hormone, and it basically is a survival instinct because it helps us learn from negative and positive experiences, and it makes our mind very black and white, so that way it can focus and make decisions, so that way we'll be both decisive and focused on the current task. you can have a hyperactive amygdala. That's how you get things like PTSD, anxiety, and depression. And the cause of the hyperactivation can either be learned or biological. Like you can be predisposed to have anxiety through like a parent or something like that. But also you can in your environment learn to have anxiety. And this is really dangerous because your brain can learn sometimes that it should be like your brain can learn sometimes that it should be anxious. And like sometimes I would argue it's kind of right because like you might be in a dangerous enough situation where like stress is warranted and it like needs to keep that alarm bell on because genuinely there is always danger. But like where this becomes maladaptive and where you should focus on like lowering it preferably is when it becomes maladaptive, which means that like you're in a situation that no longer like the amount of stress you're feeling is disproportionate to like the actual danger of the situation. Because stress, like I said, reduces your nuance. And so if you don't need to act immediately, it's actually better to have like for like doing tasks and living life to like not have a super hyperactive amygdala. Hyperactive amygdala is really only necessary like in like I would argue like the most dire of circumstances or like the most like terrible of situations of like living situations and stuff like that. And so things you can do to help your amygdala be calmer is sleep. And once again, I cannot stress how important sleep is. I know it can be really hard when like you doom scroll until the point of exhaustion. And so like you just pass out because like you're pushing down your negative emotions, which is where sitting with it comes in later. But genuinely sleep helps you regulate your mood so much, which will help your amygdala and will help your frontal lobes get recharge and kind of overpower the amygdala and kind of understand the nuances of it, which will help you with every other task on this entire list. Like sleep is like the basis for which people get better mental health. It's like the amount of mental health help you do when you're tired is going to just be so much more of like not a net positive. Not saying it won't be a net positive. I think that mental health care is like you should always be striving for it. I'm just saying that like when you think about like the time and energy you're putting into caring for your mental health, you should really put a lot of those experience points into sleeping because that's going to like exponentially improve in all other categories because your ability to learn and your ability to regulate your mood, your ability to like see things in a more nuanced and complex way is going to go up with you being able to do this. And so I would also recommend possibly looking into meditation, maybe formally get a teacher or something like that, because meditation is not just the one thing that everyone thinks is meditation, where like you just close your eyes and like you clear your mind and you breathe and you focus on your breath and all this stuff. Like that is a form of meditation, but that is not the only meditation. There are meditation types for people with ADHD, anxiety, depression, like just any sort of like mental disorder can typically like meditation's one of the only things that I think it is the only thing we found that is like effective for like every single mental disorder that exists. And so like I can deep dive into like why that is in a future video, but like that's not what we're talking about right now. And so I want you to like deep dive into your past and like understand truly, like ask yourself the therapy questions that you may or may not think are BS or whatever, but like think of like, okay, like when is the first time I remember feeling the exact emotions that I'm feeling in this moment right now? And then like you may find that like your brain is compulsively over your brain is continuously like your brain is continuously what am I trying to say? Your brain is giving you that habit of thought over and over again because it's trying to protect you, or it thinks that the current situation is applicable. And then once you find that emotion, then use mindfulness to be able to like separate. This is the kind of mindfulness, kind of not, but like literally like understand the situation. And then like this is a mindfulness tactic of like dialectical behavioral therapy, but like separate it out. You don't have to make a judgment on whether or not the significance you attach to it is valid or not. All I want you to do is to simply say, is to just simply acknowledge with this here that like that there is a separation. Like you can believe this is correct all you want, but like you need to acknowledge that on like an objective level, your perception is not reality. Like they are separate things regardless of how much you think they are correlated. And then lastly, I would just say like find a safe place to sit with it and like stop running from your negative emotions and let them come up a lot more often, as long as you're in a safe environment and as long as it won't impact your situation very negatively, whatever type of life stuff is going on and everything like that. Like if you can find a safe place to just like, like stare at the ceiling and let all the emotions come up, then like I would highly recommend doing that, as long as you understand that like this recommendation, like I'm not a licensed medical professional, I'm not a licensed therapist, I'm just a therapy student and I'm trying to share what I think my opinion is about this sort of stuff. So take it with a grain of salt. Don't do anything that could like get you harmed. Contact like the appropriate licensed people. But like I'm just giving you guys ideas, and if they sound good to you, then like do with it what you will. I'm just offering my perspective on what tends to be helpful for me and for people that I've helped out with this sort of stuff. So I noticed that like we don't really have anyone in chat right now. So like it's kind of like I would say a pretty slow stream day, and so I was going to say like questions, but I feel like we don't really have questions right now. And so I would and so this is just kind of what I would say is like my take on like the amygdala, and I hope this helps, Jordan. I know we talked about this a little bit in private, but I hope this is like a good deep dive into it. So this is like what I think is like the general causes of specifically the amygdala, or the problems you're at least presenting of the amygdala. And this is like a lot of things that I think can help with it. And if you guys want a lot more tips about how to actually practically apply this stuff, instead of me just saying like, oh, just get a meditation teacher and stuff like that. Like I get that that can be annoying because I'm not providing ways. But if you guys want me to, I can absolutely like make a video trying to like give people resources and help them do stuff like learn to meditate or get a therapist and stuff like that, or like the one I could probably help with the most is like how to form a healthy sleep schedule despite having like a super hectic life. Just like practical applications of this stuff, because I definitely don't just want to give you guys empty sentiment. I want to give you guys ways to improve in ways that you can like actually apply. So yeah, I feel pretty good about this. Thank you for watching the VOD, because like there's like literally no streamers right now, but thank you for watching the VOD, whether it's on YouTube or Twitch. Make sure to subscribe to either my YouTube or Twitch, depending on which one you're watching. Just try and subscribe to both of them. And yeah,